Hello, welcome to this episode of the 1/160th of a second photography podcast. Today I'm talking about sensor cleaning for digital cameras. So not all digital cameras are going to require sensor cleaning. Some of them are going to have built-in cleaning mechanisms, and some of them you just wouldn't do any sensor cleaning for. So for a compact camera, typically you wouldn't be able to access the sensor to clean it. And because you can't access the sensor, it's very unlikely that dirt's going to get in and you would ever have a need for cleaning the sensor. However, for interchangeable lens cameras, sensor cleaning is a big thing. And sensor cleaning is probably more acute for mirrorless cameras than it is for DSLRs. Mirrorless cameras are going to be more prone to getting dust on the sensor compared to a DSLR, and simply the reason for that is because a DSLR will have a mirror that goes in front of the sensor. An interesting point, I have compact cameras, I have DSLRs, I have mirrorless cameras, but I've never done sensor cleaning for any of my mirrorless cameras. So there are ways you can reduce dust getting on your sensor, and that's when you take your lenses off, have the camera face pointing down to reduce the chance of dust falling on your sensor. You can get cameras that have do a little shake, and certainly in my DSLRs, one of them has a cleaning mechanism and one of them doesn't. So I've cleaned DSLR sensors and I've had varying success, and I suppose that's what I want to talk about. The reason this came to the forefront was because I was doing some shooting recently with my Canon 5D Mark I, and I found that in the same area of the picture at high apertures, there was always this little smudge. So I only noticed it at high apertures, and even changing different lenses, I got the same thing in the same place. So that was obviously a bit of dust or a bit of grime on the sensor, and I'm going to have to clean it because it's irritating me. How do you know if you need to clean your sensor? Well, you have to assume that your sensor is going to be dirty and it will always have something on. You'll never have a completely clean sensor, particularly if you actually use your camera. Even if you keep the same lens on your interchangeable lens camera, you're bound to get something on it. You might think it's time to clean my sensor if you can see visible things in your normal everyday images. And that is the sort of thing where if you can see things in your everyday images, you would want to give it a clean. Of course, I can use software to get rid of them, but one, it's an extra step, and two, it's in every image, so I need to get rid of it. So you can also do a test. So if things are on your sensor, then even if you move your camera, they're not going to be blurry. So if you're hand holding something and you're taking a picture of a person, then if you have a slow shutter speed, then the person's going to be moving slightly, breathing in and out, standing still. You're going to be moving slightly. You're going to get blur in your image, but you're not going to get blur on your sensor for when you're photographing for dust. So what you do, you essentially point it at the sky. You don't point it into the sun. You put it on the biggest aperture possible, i.e. the smallest hole, so I'd go for f/22, and you take a picture. You can bump the ISO up if you need to balance exposure, because you're not bothered about the quality of the image. You want to see if there's any black marks there. So you take a picture against white and you look for black marks. So you can check yourself to see if you've got any dust or grime on your sensor. Now here comes the difficult bit. You've determined if you have any dust or grime on your sensor. You've actively investigated it. You've decided you do. So what do you do about it? So there's two things you can do. You can send it away for someone else to do it, or you can do it yourself. Sending away is going to be more expensive. If you're not comfortable with doing it yourself or touching your sensor, then that's probably the best option. If you want the guarantee and the peace of mind that it's going to be done properly and it's not going to break, and if it does break, it's someone else's fault and they will fix it for you, send it away. I think Wex Photographic in England do sensor cleaning. Camera manufacturers will do sensor cleaning, and there will be other third parties that do sensor cleaning. Going to a manufacturer is probably going to be more expensive than going to a third party. Or you can do it yourself. Now, if you want to do it yourself, you're going to have to invest in a piece of kit to do it. There are various things to use. There are various things out there. And I've bought 3 pieces of equipment to do it. So I'm going to talk about those 3 pieces of equipment. So the first piece of equipment is a little loop that magnifies and fits over the opening to the sensor. So with my DSLRs that I've sensor cleaned, I have to put the mirror up. So there's an option in the menu to have mirror lock up. So I enable that. I'm very careful about what I do once the mirror is locked up, because obviously while I'm cleaning, I could be likely to introduce as much dust as I remove. So you need to do it in a clean environment, not only pets around, not children or pets near you when you're doing it. It needs to be a clean environment. somewhere where there's not going to be a lot of movement that blows dust into your sensor. But I put this little sort of eyepiece over the camera hole where the lens would go. Lens mount, that's what it's called. I put this device over the lens mount, and it has LEDs inside, and it magnifies, and it allows you to have a good look at your sensor. And I find that incredibly useful. So the first sensor cleaning kit I got really was like an alcohol solvent and plastic wands that you fitted sort of like a cotton substance on. So you fitted essentially like gloves on them, and you put on this solvent and you went from one end of the sensor to the other. You brushed it with a plastic wand, but you put this sort of cover on. And the idea was it would push off any grime, debris, dust, and the solvent would evaporate. And that worked, but it didn't work as I expected it to. So it got rid of big splodges. It got rid of big dark things that were on my sensor. I don't know what they were. They could have been dust. They could have been parts of the camera. And actually that's a really key thing. Bits of your camera, little bits or debris from the inside of your camera can of course get onto your sensor. And particularly in an old camera like my 5D Mark I. And of course, you might move it about and it might fall off your sensor somewhere else and it might come back on another day. So going back to using the sort of solvent method, it did pick up most stuff. It didn't get rid of everything, but it got rid of the big problems. In normal photographic shooting, these were the ones I noticed, whereas the ones that stayed were ones I couldn't notice. I only noticed the smaller ones when doing tests at f/22. Now, I never shoot at f/22. So it was okay. But I did notice when shooting at f/22 that a residue had been left on the sensor. You could sort of see this washy effect on the sensor. So I sort of had to repeat this to get the washy effect off. So it really wasn't that useful, and it depended how I brushed it across. So I can never truly get rid of this washy sort of effect. I had in effect introduced it into my camera. That will always be there. I managed to get it to a minimum just by repeating the process. The next time I went to clean my camera sensor, I didn't want to use that method. So I had another look, and there was this thing called a magic loop, which I wasn't interested in. The next thing I got, which price-wise was very good, and it was comparable price-wise to the solvent solution. It was essentially a stick with a sticky bit on the end. So what you did was you put the sticky bit, you prodded it down on your sensor, and you moved it along. You didn't drag it along, you pressed, lifted, pressed, moved, press, move, press, move, press, and you'd covered all area of your sensor. And then you had these sticky bits of paper, and the idea is the sticky bits of paper are more sticky than the sticky thing on the end of the stick. So any dust, grime or whatever will stick to the paper over the sticky thing on the end of the stick. God, I've said stick a lot there. And that worked, and I could see I was starting to pull off lots of stuff. Now, because it's a square, you can use different sides. So if you think, oh, I've done the bottom bit, I'm going to use a different bit. So you can use lots and lots of different surfaces of this sticky bit. And I found that the easiest to use, but I found it gave me the best results as well. So that by far was the winner for me, that sticky thing. And I'll try and look up what it's called, and I'll try and put a note down in the description if anyone's interested. I use that on my Canon 5D Mark I. Really, if I'm going to be going to the trouble of cleaning a sensor, I might as well do my other camera as well. So my other DSLR that I had at the time, I would clean at the same time. So I would clean two things at the same time, because you're going to all the trouble of getting it out. You might as well clean more than one thing if you can. And then it's important, once you've cleaned it, to get the mirror back down and get it turned off. When you have the mirror up, you need to make sure that you've got enough charge in your battery so that it doesn't stay permanently locked up and you reduce the chance of errors. And I suppose the other thing to talk about is the size of the sensor. If you are buying a kit for your camera, you need to get a kit that matches the size of your sensor. So you can get ones that are for APS-C sensors, one for full frame sensors. I think you can get one for micro four thirds sensors. I don't know, I've never cleaned a micro four thirds sensor. You could use the logic of, I'll get the biggest and then I can always do smaller, but I would actually use the reverse logic. I'd get the smallest because you can always fit it on the biggest. If you can't fit your thing on the sensor because it's too big, then you're going to have a problem effectively cleaning it. The splodger thing that I talked about that's sticky, that was designed for full frame, so that worked on my full frame, but I actually managed to use it on my APS-C as well without issue. Now, the APS-C camera I had at the time was a DSLR, and that had a little vibration on the sensor to get dust off it, and when you turned it on and turned it off, it always did this cleaning mechanism. That means any dirt that's trapped within inside the lens mount and periodically gets back on your sensor, hopefully should come off. So at some point, probably before my next shoot, I need to do some sensor cleaning. I need to make you aware that also, you need to keep your lenses clean. No point going to all the trouble of having a sensor clean. When you put your lens on, it introduces dirt. If you leave your camera body lens cap off and you just leave it around, you're going to let dirt get in. And there's no point cleaning it either if you have a dirty front element of your lens. So you need to keep all these things clean. You don't need to brush them and clean them every time you use them, but you do just need to be mindful and act on when you see something in your image. Now, certainly, due to the sort of risky nature of cleaning a sensor, I would do it as little as possible. I'm not going to be someone who cleans a sensor every week. I'm going to do it as and when needed, really when I identify a problem in my pictures, and that's what's happened this time. I'm going to be cleaning my sensors very soon. I'm going to be checking if they all need a clean. And I suppose if I do have any major cleaning issues, there probably will be a follow-up episode to this. So I've given you some idea of how I've cleaned my sensors, why I've cleaned my sensors, and how I've worked out if I need to clean my sensors. But I'd be interested to know what you think. Do you clean your sensors more or less than me? Do you get them sent away? Have you had any disasters cleaning a sensor? Do let me know. Thank you. Goodbye.